And let's move on to the next session. As you probably know by now, the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security is seriously investigating the possibility of introducing cross-operator deposit limits, perhaps as early as 2025. Not surprisingly, opinions differ on the question of whether this is a sensible measure. Thus, it makes sense to investigate what other countries' experiences are with such limits. Here to tell us more about that, the German experience with cross-operator deposit limits is Dr. Matthias Spitz. You've seen him before, senior partner at Melchers Law. We have Peter Paul de Goeij, who is director of Netherlands Online Gambling Association, NOGA, who will provide the perspective from the Netherlands licensed operator in this debate. And the discussion will be moderated by Birgitte Sand, who is CEO of Birgitte Sand and Associates and former executive director of the Danish gambling regulator. Matthias, Peter Paul, Birgitte, welcome, please make it to the stage. And the stage is yours, Birgitte, and the panel for the next 20 minutes.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Willem and staff, for yet another excellent conference day so far. I hope that it holds after this as well. So, pleasure to be here. And please, you two, please introduce yourselves. So Peter Paul, please, who are you?
My name is Peter Paul de Goeij. I'm the Managing Director of the Netherlands Online Gambling Association, NOGA, and I've been doing that since 2019.
And Matthias?
Yeah. Name is Matthias Spitz. I'm with German law firm Melchers Law. I've also been dealing with gambling law since 15 years, roughly.
Right. So we've been preparing a little bit, and it turned out that it took longer to prepare than actually sitting up here now. So, so I will have to interrupt, I think, because we have two extremely knowledgeable people here. We're going to discuss cross-operator deposit limits in Holland. So perhaps turning to you first, Peter. What's it all about? Define it or explain to us. How would it look like, or how is it expected to look like?
So basically what we're looking at now is that although the KSA came out with new policy rules that basically instruct on within the current system a new way of looking at limits, because the central point is in the Netherlands that the player is responsible of setting his own limits. A majority in Parliament has decided that they want overarching limits, and I've been told by scholars, by legal scholars, that you need to change the law to do this. And the Ministry of Justice has now taken it upon themselves to investigate this and see what it entails, because I've also been told it's not a simple feat.
Right. And so, Matthias, you of course know a lot about the German market. So tell me, experiences from Germany, cross-border, cross-operator, anyways. Do you do that with great success today?
My honest answer would be no. So talking about cross-operator deposit limits, we have a bit of experience, since that has been coming since 2020, essentially. And I think this is the thing that I would advise the Dutch to consider. If you want to have the full thing that we have, then that is also the path to what we call the glassy citizen. So it's essentially the player being made of glass, not just transparent, but in a way totally supervised in all aspects of gambling and transactions. We can delve into the details later. But how did it come to be? In 2020, it was proposed by the overarching regulation, the Interstate Treaty on Gambling, to introduce an overarching system called LUGAS, part of which would be the cross-operator deposit limit database. And in that database, the first stage to get this implemented, there was an interim or transitional regulation where operators were asked in the online casino sector, those who wanted to apply later in a licensing process, to implement on an operator level €1,000 limit. And that time it was stakes, that was later changed to deposit. The effect of that was, in the online sector, a drop of 70% in turnover. That is at least what most of the operators have experienced. So I mean, you can ask yourself, where did this turnover go? I think if you would say that players stop just playing, I think you would lie to yourself. So the consequence certainly is if you have cross-operate deposit limits without an option to increase, then this will destroy the regulated market. And that is why when sports betting regulation or licensing was first introduced, also in 2020, it was pretty much clear with the regulator there would be an option to have tiered increases, which is in the current version is 10,000, 30,000 euros. So if you want to compare the Dutch proposals to the German regulation, I think the full truth is also that we have a system where you can actually have
where you can
have very high deposit
and do
limits
people
subject
get
to
that?
strict.
Is it easy to get higher limit?
No, it's actually, and this is where we come to the glassy player, because the other side of the coin is that if you want to have a player in the highest brackets, you need to have very stringent monitoring in place to the effect that, for example, the DSM-5 criteria, markers of harm, have to be monitored, and then there have to be reports to the regulator on a regular basis, and that is very far-reaching.
So Matthias, you're talking a lot about all the stuff they have to figure out and find out about the player and register about the player. It's sort of like, so it sounds as if they get to know the players really well. But it's not only the one operator. It's more or less, it's all of them, right? I mean, who looks down into that data vault of data about players? I mean, there's a lot in there, right? So privacy issues.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole variety of data that is collected and used for various purposes. And I think when we talk about problems with the system we have, then certainly GDPR compliance is one of them. That has not been fully resolved yet. There is it's still being contested whether the legal basis that we have actually in the law is even sufficient, because we talk, when you monitor player behavior to detect problem gambling, we talk about health data, which is the highest protected category of data in the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And so I think it's clear you have to have a very solid, robust legal basis in the regulations, in the law.
So turning to you, Peter Paul. So actually, so in Germany, they try to protect people, and in doing so, they do not protect the data. Oh. But so how do you look on this, all of this?
Well, the data concern has been raised in the Dutch context as well. As I understand it, you need a justification to infringe on the protection of personal data. So that is something that they will have to do in a change of the law. But something that really stood out for me, what you just said, is that it appears that after you have applied to have a lift of the cap, the duty of care kind of increases for that player. So it puts more burden on the operator to zoom in on that player and continue to monitor his behavior. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds fair enough. Is it easy enough to do?
Whether it's easy enough to do, if you're talking about a central or let's say an overarching player limit, I can see that will become highly complicated to have it real time or near real time to allow players to continue to play whilst being monitored if they are playing and going from operator A to operator B to operator C. Looking at Crux, the self-exclusion register, it's already pretty burdensome to keep that operating and to keep that near real-time or real-time. This system sounds even more outlandish and more complicated.
So, operator A, if operator A put their foot down and do the affordability check and figure out that this 19-year-old person should not play or play more than this and that, or deposit more than this and that. And the operator sort of says, this is your limit. That's what we feel is our duty, to take care of you, so that's it. then of course the operators, competitors can't do anything about it, can they? If it's a cross-operator deposit limit thing?
You could also look at such a player limit from a competitive point of view.
Yeah.
And if you have a, let's say, different angle, you could use it to keep customers with operator A if they have their limit.
How would that work? Explain.
Well, if a player is limited and he's playing at operator A, and he cannot go over the limit, he cannot go to operator B. Let's say incumbent operators that have large numbers of customers would have an interest, or would have a competitive angle to maybe use the limits in that fashion. I don't think that would be a very healthy outcome of
Would there
limits.
be differences? So what you're ultimately saying is that there's a difference depending on which segment you belong to as an operator, right? So it will have a different effect on land-based compared to online, or Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, it's most relevant to online.
Yeah.
I think there's one aspect I would also point out, which I think is important for everyone here, which is responsible gaming. Let's say operator A has approved a monthly deposit limit of 2,000 euro for a player. And the player decides, well, I like operator B more, so I move to that operator, and you just play like 500 euros with operator A, but the rest I want to have with operator B, who have maybe better bonuses or whatsoever. Then the question is, who is actually responsible for responsible gaming in that scenario? And this is also an unresolved issue, at least in my practical experience. Because obviously you do, when you in the ongoing operations you derive, or responsible gaming measures are triggered mainly by player behavior. Of course, the player can by themselves approach customer support or the responsible gaming side, but usually the operators themselves will also monitor the player behavior. If there's a concern, they will follow up with the player. And if you just don't have any visibility of that, because the player plays with the other operator, then the question is, who is ultimately responsible and who is also liable if you want to put a further level of complexity. And so I think this is something I would think would make sense for the Netherlands to reconsider against this aspect, because you need to be sure that you have one who is responsible for managing the relation with the customer and having an overview what's going on, and then you have also someone who you can address as a regulator. But if you have two sides who say, well, that was activity with the other operator, it's not my business, then you'll have a problem.
Yeah, joint responsibilities don't work that well, do they?
But now looking back, just this Monday, right, we had this new implementation of the policy for new responsible gaming here in Holland. So shouldn't we be just very positive about all efforts being done by politicians, legislators, regulators to take care? They might not get it perfect the first time around or the second time around, but shouldn't they deserve a kind of support from yourselves and the industry? Peter Paul, you're smiling.
Well, listen, I'm not against good regulation, regulation that is based on facts and research, etc., rather than based on fear and assumptions. And what we have had in the Netherlands is that there have been new measures imposed on the regulated operators without there being any concrete numbers. For instance, numbers of problem gambling being on the rise, or numbers that seem to suggest that the people that are suffering from gambling addiction is on the rise. Advertising is a fine example in that respect. So going to the policy rules, the last week study done by Ipsos and issued by VNLOK and NOGA together came out, and it showed that especially the group that we want to protect with imposing limits, etc., which is the vulnerable player, they are the first player group that leaves the system if they are faced with strict measures like limits. Someone tapping them on the shoulder, are you all right? And the problem is if you have overarching limits, they have one other operator to go to, and that's the illegal operator.
Right.
So I am in favor of protection of vulnerable players, but we have to make sure that we don't, throw away the child with the bath, the water,
Right.
as you say in Dutch.
Yep.
But anyway,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm apprehensive. Yeah.